Hi, my name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. In this video, I want to talk about the economic history, the rise of modern Russia in the last quarter of a century. So I'm not talking about Russia, 150 years ago. I'm talking about Russia today. Okay? It's a real rabbit hole. The rise of Russia since Vladimir Putin. Putin is a dictator. And the thing we know about dictators is this. Every step you take away from freedom and democracy and free markets and free movement of labor and capital is a step in the direction of inefficiency and economic inefficiency, which will eventually not be able to perform and potentially implode upon itself. Let's take a look at first the history. Hi, I'm back. I'm back from chasing this rabbit, white rabbit, mind you, down a rabbit hole. So what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the historical genesis of the current Russian economy in the last 25 years as commanded by, in a command control situation, its current leader. But I think the historical genesis is important because it lays down some critical facts that most people don't know. One, Boris Yeltsin, he did a pretty good job with this democracy and navigating and surfing it in the 90s. He got a little bit too involved with 1, alcohol, 2, chasing women, and 3, corruption. So by the 90s, he needed to exit. He had a handpicked successor, Nezarkov, and this guy was a pretty good Westerner in respect to free movement of labor and capital. But at that time, the markets collapsed, the ruble collapsed, and so he was a short-lived. The rabbit just bit me. A little bit short-lived. Next, enter Vladimir Putin. Putin signed a special agreement, I don't think you guys know this, with Yeltsin that said, from here on, all of Yeltsin's successors, and all of Yeltsin's people, all the Yeltsin family, Yeltsin himself was exempt from prosecution for corruption, at least as it related to the 90s. And what do you know? Putin was nominated as temporary prime minister and then elected and at very questionable elections as full-time prime minister of Russia. His first act was to narrow in and reel in the free press. You can say a lot of things about Yeltsin, and he certainly had a lot of faults, but he had free press. So the first thing that occurs is Putin, the man without a face, takes power. He's deemed that and branded a man without a face, and there's a book written called A Man Without a Face, because we don't really know where he came from. He tells you where he came from, but any information you know about him, his grandfather, his mother who secretly baptized him, that is all coming from Vladimir Putin's mythology that he wrote. We don't really know where he came from and what his history was in St. Petersburg as a child. I do know that he was a part-time, nighttime cab driver for a while. So this guy who was, let's say, a nighttime, we'll say, metaphorically back then, cab driver, Uber driver, and he's now prime minister. A couple of events occurred to solidify his power. And a couple of events occurred to bring him to economic, in his mind, success. First event, in Moscow and surrounding regions and suburbs, buildings collapsed through explosives. And it was a series of events they blamed on the people from the southern border, Chechnya and later Georgia would be later addressed. And they all said it was Chechnyans blowing up apartment buildings in Moscow back then. But the reality is some local police thought it a attempt, and they arrested the people involved, and they were all FSB agents with FSB branded explosives made only in the FSB headquarters in the city of Perm. Putin spun it as, this was just a test to see if the local police were doing a good job, once the evidence was overwhelming that these bombings appeared to be FSB orchestrated and not Chechnyans. Nevertheless, right from the playbook of a dictator, create a crisis at the southern border and say we need a strong leader, and this is what happened. He solidified his power in Russia early on. The next thing that happened, oil went from $10 to $100 in short time. The thing you need to know about oil, it has an inelastic curve. So like salt is inelastic. I don't care if salt is 50 cents a shaker 150 cents or $1.50 a shaker. I'm still going to buy it. Something like, I don't know, bread can be substituted. It has a lot of substitute goods, so the curve is a little bit more elastic. And with an inelastic commodity like oil and gas, people are not going to stop driving their car and are not going to stop heating their apartments in the winter. You can charge whatever you want, and you rake in the profits. So when oil and gas went from 50 to 100, it was his cash cow, his singular crop. And he made great relations with Western Europe. How did he do that? Okay, here's the story. This is the most important communique of our century. And that's in the words of Garry Kasparov in his book, Winter is Coming. When 9/11 occurred, he went running to the phone, almost tripping, out of breath, calling George W. Bush 43. When he did not make contact, he persisted until he did. He was the first world leader to give condolences. And instead of being a rigid KGB agent that he was, milk and honey was coming out of his mouth. He said, George, we're in this together. Good versus evil, and we are going to work together. It was the greatest sales pitch ever. And with that green check mark, maybe Putin is not that bad. He was able to sell the Germans and all the other Europeans that maybe oil and gas relationships with Russia is not that bad of an idea. Now, here's the thing. Rice and Bush, 43, didn't believe it fully, but they needed the information he had to help in Afghanistan. But it was a great sales job, and it changed the course of the century. So we've got an economy being built on the paradox of plenty, the Dutch disease, the resource curse. You've got resources being built up and pipelines being laid down both east and west, in Siberia and to Europe. Let me tell you a story how that goes. Bright lights, big city, when I was a hotshot stockbroker on Wall Street with suspenders, there was a guy who ran something called the Technology Fund. He was a maverick. He was a genius. And people said, this guy is amazing. He's a strong leader. He invested in 5 technology stocks. Everybody and their mother, including widows and orphans, were investing in it. Of course, undiversified, systematic, unsystematic risk. The whole thing crashed. He turned into vapor. Nobody knows whatever happened to him eventually, but I'm sure he's fine now, whatever. But the point being, these geniuses, strong leaders, and mavericks, and these unsymmetrical people are often just, luck, flip of a coin. A clock is right 2 times a day. So this is what Putin built his economy on, the resource curse. An undiversified crop, an undiversified cash cow and cash crop. And if you're a farmer, if you keep on planting the same crop in the same field, undiversified, insects will get in. He didn't care. He implemented his economy by putting all his friends, not gas and oil experts, not businessmen. And if you guys are businessmen out there, you know how rough it is out there. It's Game of Thrones. You've got to really be sharp and on your toes. He put these whatever jamokes out there, these blokes that were his cronies. He put them in charge of oil and gas. What does this mean for Russia? The bottom line is every step away from free markets and capitalism, 100%. Every time you jump away from that, you create inefficiencies. The Russian economy is a poster child for inefficient economies that historians 100 years from now will look back and say, whoa, how could that have ever existed? And if it did exist, how could the people have stood it? For an economy to collapse, you need a couple things. You need something structural. That being, like Putin, inefficiency, Dutch disease. You need 2, something toxic. Back in 2008, we had toxic mortgage-backed securities. And we had both those ingredients. So now he's got something toxic. You don't have oil at $100 a barrel. We've got windmills, alternatives, nanotechnology with nuclear third-generation plants going up. We've got people just like here in Poland down the road, they're ripping up the train tracks that were once the Russian gauge that brought in oil and gas, and they're replacing it with European gauge. And now they said, no road back. We're never taking that oil again. Of course, somebody like Austria, we're all neutral Austrians, 90% of their oil and gas still comes from Russia. And they're like, well, we're considering it. No. Poles here, they're ripping it up, and they don't care. No road back. Russia will collapse because it has this structural and toxic element. What is the toxic element? The toxic element is their geopolitical conflict in Ukraine. No matter all the smoke and mirrors that the Russian economy and the world and, China, it's the great enabler, it's hollow. Command and control economies never do as well as capitalist economies. I was in Russia in the 1990s, and let me tell you what it was like. It was devastating. There was starvation in Russia. They would find people in their apartments just passed to the next life. I was in Poland in the 1990s. What was it like? People were moving and shaking aggressively, entrepreneurs thinking and buzzing, minds going. You can't compare a capitalist economy to a command and control economy in any way. Think about the Silicon Valley. 1 square block of the Silicon Valley probably has more people that are potential Nobel Prize winners than all of Russia many times over. Because that's what capitalism does. It makes us all agree to live to our best potential. So what is toxic? What is toxic in Russia? The toxic is not the MBS, but it's the geopolitical conflict in Ukraine. And it will collapse, and everybody says, no, it won't. It will collapse faster and most unexpected. When people think it's going to go on forever, it will be unexpected and collapse. Okay, so the bottom line is the Russian economy is going to collapse. Ukraine's going to win. Russia will lose. Putin, every single mistake he has made has been wrong. The only reason he got rich is because he took a little bit of the Forrest Gump way to get rich. He just got lucky, bought Apple stock, but Forrest Gump is wealthier and smarter than Putin, because Forrest Gump is going for self-actualization. So hang on, guys. I'll create more videos about the Russian economy, but know that it's got these structural inefficiencies embedded in it that it can't dig itself out of. And 2, it's got toxic all written all over it. Thank you very much. My name is Mark Biernot. Have a great day.